Hello, everyone. Alex, what's the matter? You look like you've just lost your best friend, Susan said, her voice cutting through my thoughts. Come on, it's a Christmas party. Startled, I flinched and looked up, finding myself face to face with her. Susan, my best friend's wife, was leaning toward me with an expression of genuine concern. Under different circumstances, the view might have been a little distracting. Oh, hey, Susan, I replied, managing a weak smile. Sorry, I guess I'm not really in a party mood tonight. Got a lot on my mind. Even as the words left my mouth, the weight of what I was planning and the pain it would cause her pressed heavily on my chest. Susan pulled out the chair next to me and sat down, her expression soft but persistent. Come on, cheer up a little, she said, lightly brushing her hand against mine. Tell Aunt Susan what's bothering you. It's nothing really, I said, shaking my head. Just mulling over some things I have to deal with next week. Not exactly looking forward to it. Her smile turned coaxing. Come on, dance with me, she urged. Look at Aaron and Helen. They're having the time of their lives out there. Why don't we give it a shot? Who knows? Maybe we'll get just as many jealous stares as they are. Her eyes sparkled mischievously as she leaned in a bit closer. And once I've worn you out on the dance floor, you can buy me a drink. Then we'll talk. I've got something to ask you. I hesitated, but her persistence eventually won me over. She led me to the dance floor, and as soon as we started moving, she slipped into my arms with an ease that felt almost nostalgic. It reminded me of high school, swaying together at carefree sock hops. But no matter how natural it felt, I couldn't fully focus on her. My eyes kept drifting toward Aaron and Helen, who were laughing and twirling together, oblivious to my gaze. Each step with Susan brought back the painful truths I'd uncovered and the careful plans I'd made to handle them. As we moved to the rhythm, my mind churned with bitterness over the betrayal and a cold resolve to take control of the situation on my terms. Helen and I had been deeply in love when we got married, just like most couples. Unlike many, that passion had lasted for years. Up until the 4th of July party, I had assumed it would stay that way until one of us passed away. At least our kids were grown, out of college, and established in their careers. What was coming would hurt them, but as adults, they'd be able to handle it better. Like most men blindsided by their wife's infidelity, I never saw it coming. If I hadn't overheard that conversation at the Independence Day party, I might still be blissfully ignorant. We'd hosted the party at our place, a modest acreage with a stream running near the house and a well-maintained swimming hole about 150 feet from the back door. I'd even built a shelter and grill there, and we'd spent countless happy days enjoying it until that day. We'd had more guests than I expected, so I went back to the house for supplies. Standing in the pantry, I overheard voices coming from just outside the bathroom. The words still make my stomach churn. Rita, Helen's sister, was laughing as she told someone, "No, Alex is so clueless he doesn't suspect a thing. Steph can tell him whatever she wants, and he buys it. We have a deal. If one of our guys asks, we say we're with each other. Most of the time, though, we're with one of our friends, not each other. What our men don't know won't hurt them, right? Just look at how much time Steph spends with Aaron at these parties. Neither Alex nor Allison even bats an eye. Steph says Aaron's way better than Tyler was, but she dreads the day she has to stop seeing him if Alex or Allison gets suspicious." I was frozen in shock. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop watching Helen and Aaron, trying desperately to convince myself there was an innocent explanation. But the more I replayed their interactions, the more the pieces started to fall into place. Aaron wasn't just my best friend. We'd been like brothers since grade school. We grew up together with Susan and Helen. How could he do this to me? Then the bitter realization hit me. He wasn't screwing me over. He was just screwing my wife. Some friend. We had drifted apart a little after I joined the military. I spent 26 years in the Army before retiring and moving back to our small hometown 2 years ago. Meanwhile, Aaron had gone off to college, then returned to build a successful business. Now, he was a big fish in the small pond of our 5,000-person town. But that was about to change. I'd already called in a few favors from some old Army buddies. I found myself tapping into skills I thought I'd never need again after retiring. My friends and I were preparing a little surprise for my loving wife, Helen, and her friend, Aaron. Like most men in this situation, once I got past the initial shock and sickness of betrayal, I began planning the inevitable ending. Instead of confronting them right away, I chose to bide my time, gathering evidence, strategizing my moves, and preparing for every possible reaction they might have. One of the first calls I made was to a retired military buddy of mine, now a powerful attorney in a nearby town. He became my advisor, guiding me on the legal aspects and helping me navigate what was sure to be a messy divorce. I followed his advice to the letter, ensuring that every step I took was calculated and airtight. Together, we laid out a detailed plan to deal with both Aaron and Helen. Lost in the memories of how this downward spiral began, I stopped paying much attention to Susan as we danced. My eyes were glued to Helen and Aaron, the intensity of my glare probably giving me away. I stumbled, breaking the rhythm, and Susan looked up at me, startled. Her expression shifted when she followed my gaze. A troubled look crossed her face. "Alex," she said softly, stopping mid-step and taking my hand. "Oh my God, you know, don't you? How long have you known?" Her voice cracked as she led me toward the balcony. I followed, almost in a daze. Once we reached the edge, she turned to face me, tears glistening in her eyes. "I suspected for a while," she admitted, her voice trembling, "but I only got solid proof last week. What about you? When did you find out? Why didn't you tell me? I was planning to tell you tonight. What are you going to do now?" Her questions tightened the knot in my chest, and I struggled to get the words out. "Susan," I finally managed, "I'm so sorry. I'm going to destroy him and leave her. I just need to finish laying the groundwork. I've been trying to do this in a way that doesn't hurt you too much. I didn't want you caught in the crossfire." Susan reached up and touched my face, her hand trembling. "Alex, honey, just do what you need to do," she whispered. "I know you'd never hurt me intentionally. I've known that since we were kids. I just wish—" Her voice broke, and she turned abruptly, running back into the hotel with tears streaming down her face. I stood there, stunned, until a sharp pain in my gut doubled me over. Memories of that July 4th party came flooding back. The moment I pretended to get drunk and go to bed early, only to catch Helen red-handed. I leaned against the railing, the bile rising in my throat as I recalled the humiliation. That night, Helen had come looking for me, thinking I'd passed out. Instead of concern, she scolded me for embarrassing her in front of our friends. Her words were like acid, and I walked away from her tirade, slipping around the side of the house. I eventually went back inside and told our hostess I wasn't feeling well and needed to leave. I knew Aaron would make sure Helen got home. After all, he was taking care of her that night. I couldn't help but let that bitter thought fester. In the months that followed, my military buddies and I uncovered more than enough evidence to confirm her betrayal. Hidden cameras, candid photos, and overheard conversations painted a damning picture. The most gut-wrenching moment, though, came on that July 4th. I had cracked open the guest room door just enough to see Helen lying there, completely wrapped up in Aaron. Watching them, hearing them, it was almost too much to bear. But instead of bursting in, I held myself back, knowing that a calculated revenge would cut deeper than raw rage ever could. I snapped a few pictures, closed the door silently, and went back to bed, pretending to sleep. The next morning, I started planning. With the help of trusted friends, I began collecting evidence and preparing for a confrontation. Some of my buddies even made investments in a company I'd formed to acquire shares of Aaron's computer consulting firm. It was a tightly held business, but I knew some of the original investors wanted out. Aaron had been skimming profits and paying himself and his cronies ridiculous salaries. My friends and I quietly acquired a controlling interest, staying just under the radar to avoid detection. By the end of the year, we controlled nearly 73% of the company through proxies and agreements. Aaron never saw it coming. His downfall was set for January 10th, the day of the annual shareholders meeting. That would be the last day he held any power in our small town, and I intended to make sure it was a day he'd never forget. My thoughts snapped back to the present as I saw Susan walking through the hotel lobby. Something twisted inside me as I watched her. For a moment, all I felt was sadness. I realized I couldn't leave things as they were. I had to talk to her again, Re-entering the hotel, I followed Susan through the lobby, down the hallway past the conference rooms, and out the side door. I watched as she bolted toward the parking lot. Without thinking, I ran after her. By the time I reached the lot, she was already driving off. I quickly jumped into my car and followed. Thankfully, it was late, and in a small town like ours, traffic was minimal. I kept her car in sight, my suspicions confirmed when she turned toward her house. Slowing down, I kept my distance to avoid drawing attention. When she parked, I pulled up shortly after and made my way inside, finding her collapsed on the bed, her body racked with sobs. Susan had always held a special place in my heart. If things had gone differently, she might have been my wife. We'd been close since grade school, even dated some in high school. But while I was off at basic training, Aaron had swooped in, convincing her to marry him instead. It was ancient history, yet seeing her like this reopened old wounds. I sat down beside her and gently wrapped my arms around her trembling frame. She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes before burying her face in my chest, clutching me tightly. I held her, stroking her hair softly, offering what little comfort I could until her tears subsided. Eventually, she pulled back, wiping her face. "Oh God, Alex," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry. You're going through so much, and all I'm doing is unloading my sorrow onto you. What are we going to do?" I stood and extended my hand, helping her to her feet. "First, you're going to make us a pot of coffee," I said, attempting to inject some calm into the moment. "And while we drink it, I'll fill you in on the plan for what's coming in a few days." Her face shifted from sadness to alarm. "What?" "Alex, no. Don't do anything drastic. You think you know Aaron, but he has so many powerful friends in this town. If you go after him, he'll ruin you. I couldn't stand it if something happened to you," she pleaded. I shook my head. "Susan, don't worry. I'm not talking about a physical attack, though God knows I'd love to," I admitted, my voice hardening. "No, my friends and I considered that back in August, but we dismissed it. The plan I've put in place will hurt Aaron far more than anything I could do with my fists." "August?" she gasped. "You've known since August? How did you act so normal all this time? And why didn't you tell me?" "Damn it, Alex. I've only been certain since Thanksgiving." "Susan," I said softly, "I needed time. I had to gather evidence, plan everything, and, more than anything, figure out how to protect you. Part of what's been weighing on me tonight is how to break this to you. You can have copies of all the evidence I've collected if you want, but you should know, things are going to get messy after the holidays. I want to give my kids one last normal Christmas. Then, after the first of the year, I'll file the papers." Her eyes filled with determination. "Please, Alex, wait until after the new year. Let's coordinate our moves. You know what I'm going to do. I'm divorcing that scumbag and taking him for every penny I can. After that, I'll try to rebuild what's left of my life." We spent the next hour discussing everything. I told her about the evidence I had, the steps I'd taken, and my plans for dealing with Aaron and Helen. She offered some insightful suggestions, many of which I decided to incorporate. Eventually, I realized it was time to leave. Aaron and Helen would be leaving the party soon, and I didn't want to risk him finding us together. I suggested Susan return to the party and pretend she'd been there the entire time. That way, she and Aaron could bring Helen home as if nothing had happened. As I headed for the door, Susan stopped me. She pulled me close and gave me a gentle kiss, her hand resting on my cheek. "Good night, Alex," she whispered with a brave little smile. When I returned home, Helen was already in bed. She must have come in late, still drunk from the party. Seeing her lying there stoked my anger all over again. It took everything I had to keep myself from exploding. I grabbed my clothes, dressed in the kitchen while the coffee brewed, and seethed silently. One more month, I reminded myself. Just one more month, and I could finally make them pay for the pain they'd caused Susan and me. The day finally arrived, the annual shareholders meeting at Aaron's company. Everything had been meticulously planned. We'd arranged for the previous shareholders to issue proxies authorizing Aaron to vote their shares. Then, we executed newer proxies, dated after the sale but before the record date, giving me control over the voting rights. Legally, the older proxies were invalid, and I now held the power to decide the company's future. My friends and I gathered at the hotel where the meeting was being held. We had already decided that I would become president, CEO, and chairman of the board. Aaron hadn't staggered the board terms, meaning the entire board was up for election each year. With my friends as the new board members, the outcome was certain. My attorney and the county sheriff were both present. The sheriff had divorce papers for Aaron from Susan and was ready to step in if Aaron caused trouble. Standing outside the meeting room, we listened as Aaron, expecting a routine session, called for any new business. That was our cue. We opened the doors and walked in. "Alex," Aaron said, his voice filled with confusion as he saw me enter with my entourage. Aaron's face twisted in confusion as I strode into the room. "What are you doing?" "We're in the middle of a meeting here," he said, his irritation evident. "Sorry I'm late, Aaron," I replied smoothly, stepping forward. "I guess I got here just in time. I believe I heard you calling for new business." He gave me a strange look before chuckling dismissively. "Well, yes, but this is a stockholder meeting for my company. I don't think you own any stock, do you?" "Oh, Aaron," I said with a faint smile. "I think you might want to double-check your records. You see, I personally own around 10% of 4 states' computer consultants. Additionally, I control 51% of Southwest Missouri Holdings, which, as of now, owns 64% of your company. In total, that gives me control of roughly 73% of 4 states." Aaron's expression froze. "What? That's not possible," he snapped, rifling through his files. "I have the list of all current shareholders right here, along with their proxies." His assistant handed him a book labeled Current Shareholders. He flipped through it quickly, his confident grin fading as his face went pale. Then it turned red with anger. "This is bullshit," he shouted. "What do you think you're pulling here?" I stepped up to the podium, taking the microphone in hand. By now, each of Aaron's board members had been quietly flanked by one of my own associates. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "my colleagues and I have conducted an election in accordance with the company bylaws. A new board of directors has been appointed, and this board has named me president, CEO, and chairman of the board. Effective immediately, all previous board members are dismissed, and Aaron, you're fired. Security personnel will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. Severance will be provided as outlined for each position. Though in your case, Aaron, no severance was specified." Aaron's fists clenched as his face contorted with rage. "You son of a bitch. I thought you were my friend." He stepped toward me, his hand curling into a fist. "I ought to beat the crap out of you." Before he could move further, the sheriff standing nearby intervened. "Sir," he said firmly, "if you assault this man, I'll have to arrest you for battery." I met Aaron's glare, my voice cold and sharp. "Go ahead, Aaron. Try it. I'd love to give you a taste of what all those years of Army training can do." My attorney added with a smirk, "Mr. Adams, please proceed. It'll make adding an assault charge to the lawsuits we've already filed against you that much easier." Aaron froze, his face a mix of confusion and fury. "What lawsuits?" he demanded, turning toward the attorney. "What the hell are you talking about?" Calmly, my lawyer replied, "We've filed suit to recover funds we believe you embezzled from the company. Additionally, there's a lawsuit from Mr. Mahoney alleging alienation of affection for his wife, Helen." Aaron's voice rose to a shout. "What the hell do you mean, alienation of affection? And what misuse of funds?" The sheriff stepped forward, handing Aaron a packet of papers. "You've been served," he said flatly. "These are divorce papers from your wife, Susan, citing infidelity, along with a restraining order and an order for you to vacate her home. You'll also find details about the alienation of affection lawsuit filed by Mr. Mahoney, including dates and times documenting your affair with his wife." The murmurs in the room erupted into a roar. Turning, I saw that the meeting room doors had been opened, revealing a hallway packed with curious onlookers and reporters. Somehow, word had gotten out about the impending showdown, and the local paper had been tipped off. The town rumor mill had been in overdrive all morning, and the spectacle didn't disappoint. I allowed myself a small moment of satisfaction, knowing that Helen, my cheating wife, was being served her own set of divorce papers at that very moment. As if on cue, my phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen, and I couldn't resist answering. Hello, Helen, I said, keeping my tone neutral. I'm really busy right now. Can this wait? You bastard, she screamed. What the hell is this? Divorce? You're accusing me of infidelity? That's right, Helen, I interrupted, my voice icy. Here's what you're going to do. Go watch the DVD in the player, then pack your things and get out of my house. I'm busy dealing with your lover right now. Without waiting for her response, I hung up and switched off my phone. The local paper had a field day, and the story even made its way to national news given the company's widespread dealings. Calls poured in from old Army buddies, many of whom admitted they'd suspected Helen had been unfaithful during my deployments. It was bittersweet to hear, but I had more pressing matters to deal with. Helen and I spoke just once after the divorce proceedings began. Like many unfaithful spouses, she thought she could spin the narrative and convince me to take her back. We met at the attorney's office, where she tried one last plea. Alex, she began, her voice saccharine. Can we just talk about this? Honey, I know your feelings are hurt, but Aaron didn't mean anything to me. It's always been you. I've loved you since we were kids. Just give me a few minutes, Alex, Helen said, her tone shifting to one of contrition. I'll sign the papers if that's still what you want. I looked from Helen to the two attorneys seated with us in the conference room. All right, I said, my voice steady. But I want the lawyers to hear everything, and I want the discussion recorded. If you're okay with that, I'll give you one chance to talk. Helen gave a nervous laugh. Oh, Alex, do we really need attorneys for a private conversation? We used to talk all the time. What's different now? You know exactly what's different, I replied firmly. I'm not giving you a chance to twist my words or make up claims that could complicate the divorce. So, it's attorneys and a recording, or no conversation. Take it or leave it. Reluctantly, she agreed, and we began. Once we were all seated, Helen launched into her plea. Alex, you're blowing this way out of proportion, she said, her voice teetering between desperation and indignation. Yes, I cheated, and I am so sorry, but does that really justify throwing away 25 years of marriage? Haven't you ever done something you regretted? Aaron kept pursuing me, and eventually, I gave in. I'm not proud of it, but come on. Are you seriously going to toss me aside over one mistake? Her words struck me, and I stared at her in disbelief. One mistake? I said, my voice rising. Helen, if it had been just one time, I might have been able to forgive you. But it wasn't, was it? I have proof of months of infidelity with Aaron alone. And God only knows how many others there've been over the years. Helen's face flushed with anger, but I pressed on. What about Tyler? Care to give me his last name so I can pay him a visit? And what about all the men while I was away? I've had friends come forward, people who knew or suspected you were cheating while I was deployed. Were they all wrong? Helen's eyes widened at my outburst, then narrowed as her temper flared. You asshole, she spat. How dare you? You left me alone all those years, running off to do your so-called duty, with no thought of how I felt. I was stuck at home, raising the kids and managing everything on my own. I had needs too, Alex. I needed companionship, someone to tell me I was desirable. Is it my fault I sought comfort where I could? Her voice cracked as she went on. Yes, I had some male friends while you were gone, but nothing I did cost you anything. And it's not like you were some amazing husband in bed either. Oh no, you were too busy with your duty. And don't think I didn't hear the rumors about you and those bar girls. But none of your men would ever rat you out, would they? I clenched my fists, but before I could respond, she continued. And as for Aaron and Tyler, they were only in my bed twice while you were home. Twice. And even then, I always gave you what you wanted. I never said no, Alex. Not once. How can you say I wasn't a good wife? I played the part perfectly. The dutiful military spouse, attending all your events, pretending to like those simpering officers' wives. And now, you're throwing me away because I had a few friends you didn't approve of? You can go straight to hell. With that, she snatched the divorce papers from the table, signed them with a flourish, and shoved them toward the attorneys. You can all rot in hell, she hissed before storming out of the room. None of us even had time to respond before she disappeared. 2 weeks later, Helen rented a U-Haul and moved out. From what the boys told me, She settled in a small retirement community in Florida. I haven't seen or spoken to her since that day. The property settlement worked out surprisingly well for me. Helen was so enraged during the meeting that she barely paid attention to the terms. Her attorney, either shocked or incompetent, didn't push back on the lopsided agreement. Sure, she got half of my pension and the brokerage account, but I kept the house, the land, and my majority ownership of Aaron's company. In the end, I walked away with over 80% of our assets. Helen, for her part, had enough to live comfortably, but it didn't buy her happiness. Her reputation followed her, and any man she got serious with eventually learned about her past. I felt a twinge of pity for her, but honestly, wouldn't you want to know the full truth about someone before getting involved? As for Aaron's company, my friends and I orchestrated a full buyout, taking it private to overhaul the business. With strategic improvements, we eventually took it public again, and the stock soared. The returns were massive. We brought in professional management and secured a listing on the NYSE. After that, I stepped down, ready to start a new chapter. Susan, by the way, ended up with nearly all of Aaron's stock in the divorce. When the company went public, she became quite wealthy. Aaron, on the other hand, didn't fare so well. Life in our town became unbearable for him, and he eventually moved about 100 miles away. Last I heard, he was managing a small grocery store and living in a one-bedroom apartment in a low-income complex. Revenge, it turns out, can be both deeply satisfying and highly profitable, especially when it's served with a side of justice. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories on the channel. Bye.